Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the podcast. And today, I'm going to go my review of AEW's Revolution. Starting off tonight, man, we have a grudge match. It is Adam Page taking on MJF. Before the match even gets started, we have MJF pretty much playing mind games with the crowd. Seems as if Adam Page's old school theme was being played, but then it turned into MJF's theme. MJF walks out to the ring, like I said, playing mind games with the crowd. The match itself, man, I thought was a great match. Back and forth matchup between Page and MJF. Page and MJF both exchange in the middle of the ring, with MJF trying to keep the pace of the match. But Page hits a fallaway slam on MJF. Page then hits a moonsault to the outside, taking out MJF. MJF then hits a hammerlock DDT on Page for a near fall. Page then gets up, hits a deadeye on MJF for a near fall. Page then hits a buckshot lariat in the middle of the ring for a near fall. Page then spits in MJF's face, kind of payback on what MJF did to Page a couple weeks back. Page then goes for another buckshot lariat, but MJF counters it with the salt of the earth. The hold then gets broken. MJF then mocks Page. MJF then hits a tombstone on Page on a chair on the outside. MJF gets back in the ring. Referee starts to count. Gets close to 10, but Page gets back in the ring. MJF then looks flustered. MJF then was screaming, "Why not me?" Page then hits a deadeye on MJF, as well as another buckshot lariat, pins for the 3. And your winner of the match is Adam Page. Hats off to Adam Page for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we have a TBS title matchup. It is Mercedes Moné defending the TBS title against Momo Watanabe. I thought it was a decent match. Back and forth matchup between Watanabe and Moné, with Moné keeping the pace of the match. Moné then hits a Meteora on Watanabe. Moné then hits a powerbomb on Watanabe on the outside. It looked absolutely brutal. Watanabe then gets up, lands multiple kicks on Moné. Moné then gets up, hits a backstabber on Watanabe. Watanabe gets up, hits a Meteora for a near fall. Moné then applies a statement maker, but the hold is broken. Moné then hits a powerbomb on Watanabe for a near fall. Watanabe then gets up, hits an avalanche choke slam off the top rope on Moné. Moné then gets up, hits a moneymaker on Watanabe. And then Moné hits or applies a statement maker. And your winner of the match and still TBS champion is Mercedes Moné. Hats off to Mercedes Moné for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we have a number 1 contenders matchup. It is Ricochet taking on Swerve. I thought this was a great match, man. Back and forth matchup between Ricochet and Swerve, with Swerve keeping the pace of the match. Swerve then was punching Ricochet on the outside. Nana then tries to stop Swerve. Swerve then gets distracted, ends up pushing Nana. Nana then gets pissed off. He ends up leaving the match, leaving Swerve behind. Ricochet then hits a springboard Dragon Rana on Swerve. Ricochet then hits a Poison Rana on Swerve off the apron. Swerve then gets up, hits a Swerve Stomp on Ricochet for a near fall. Ricochet then hits a Northern Light suplex into a Brain Buster on Swerve in the middle of the ring. Ricochet then goes to the top rope, hits a 630 on Swerve for a near fall. Prince Nana comes back out to the ring. He ends up stealing the jacket from Ricochet, but Ricochet then hits a tope to the outside, taking out Prince Nana. Ricochet then grabs the robe. Ricochet then hits a Death Valley driver on Swerve on the outside. It looks absolutely brutal. Ricochet then hits a Vertigo on Swerve for a near fall, and Swerve then gets up, hits 2 house calls on Ricochet for a near fall, but Swerve then hits the finish, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match and new number 1 contender for the AEW World Championship is Swerve Strickland. After the match, Swerve then grabs the robe. He gives the robe to Prince Nana. Both Nana and Swerve both embrace in the middle of the ring, and then Nana ends up putting the robe on Swerve Strickland. I thought it was a great moment there between Swerve Strickland and Prince Nana. Moving on from that, we have a Continental Championship matchup. It is Okada defending the Continental title against Brody King. I thought it was a decent match. Back and forth matchup between Okada and King, with King keeping the pace of the match. Okada, though, hits a elbow drop off the top rope on Brody King. King then gets up, hits a Death Valley driver on Okada. Okada then hits Brody King with the Continental title, with the referee being distracted, which allowed Okada to hit a Rainmaker on Brody King. And then King then gets up, but Okada hits another Rainmaker on King, pretty much sealing the deal. Pins for the 3. And your winner of the match and still Continental Champion is Okada. Hats off to Okada for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It's for the AEW Tag Team Championships. It is the Hurt Syndicate defending the AEW Tag Team titles against the Outrunners. The match itself, I thought it was an okay match. Back and forth matchup between both teams with the Hurt Syndicate keeping the pace of the match. Lashley then hits a power slam in the middle of the ring for a near fall, followed by a spear. And then Lashley hits another spear in the middle of the ring, pins for the 3. And your winners of the match and still AEW Tag Team Champions are the Hurt Syndicate. Hats off to the Hurt Syndicate for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a Hollywood ending match for the AEW Women's Championship. It is Toni Storm defending the AEW Women's Championship against Mariah May. This was ultimately a grudge match. The match itself, it was a great match, man. Back and forth matchup between May and Storm, with May attacking Luther at the stage, pretty much hitting a drop kick on Luther, sending him over a table. Toni then puts Mariah through a table, which I thought was absolutely brutal. It was actually on the side of the stage. She ends up putting May through the table. May then gets up, hits a pile driver off the steel steps. Toni is busted wide open. Toni then wraps her hands in broken glass. May then hits a Mayday on Storm for a near fall, but Storm then gets up, hits a Storm Zero on a chair on May for a near fall. May then hits a Mayday on the stage on Toni Storm for a near fall, but Toni then hits Mariah May with the shoe, which allowed Toni Storm to hit a Storm Zero through a table that was set up on the stage. Pins for the 3, and your winner of the match, and still AEW Women's Champion, is Toni Storm. After the match, you can see Toni Storm pretty much laying over the helpless body of Mariah May, and then you can look up at the Titantron, and it says, "The End." So it looks like the matchups here between Mariah May and Toni Storm, that story has finally come to an end. Moving on from that, we have an international title matchup. It is Takeshita defending the international title against Kenny Omega. The match itself, I thought was a great match, man. Back and forth matchup between Omega and Takeshita, with Omega and Takeshita both exchanging in the middle of the ring. Don Callis attacks Omega ringside. Takeshita then was keeping the pace of the match, but Omega hits a moonsault on Takeshita for a near fall, followed by a Snapdragon. Omega then hits a V-trigger on Takeshita, followed by a powerbomb on Takeshita. Takeshita then gets up, somehow hits a Blue Thunder Bomb on Omega for a near fall. Omega then hits a springboard powerbomb. Takeshita then gets up, hits a Tombstone Piledriver on Omega, followed by a running knee for a near fall. Omega then gets up, hits a Piledriver on Takeshita for a near fall, followed by a Poison Rana. Don Callis then tries to save Takeshita, but Omega ends up hitting a roll-up on Takeshita, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match and new AEW International Champion is Kenny Omega. Hats off to Kenny Omega for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we have a steel cage matchup. It is Will Ospreay taking on Kyle Fletcher. This is pretty much a grudge match between Ospreay and Fletcher. I thought it was a great match, man. Probably one of the best cage matches I've seen in quite some time. Back and forth matchup between Ospreay and Fletcher, with Fletcher keeping the pace of the match. But Ospreay hits a springboard forearm, taking out Fletcher. Ospreay then hits a standing sky twister for a near fall in the middle of the ring. Fletcher then gets up, hits a Liger Bomb on Ospreay, followed by a devastating brainbuster for a near fall. Mark Davis is here. He comes out to the ring with a bag full of tools. Mark then cuts the lock off the steel cage. Mark then pretty much gives Fletcher a chair. Ospreay then hits Fletcher with a barbed wire bat, which I thought was absolutely brutal. Fletcher then pulls out a United Empire armband. Ospreay looks on. Ospreay pretty much tells Fletcher no. Fletcher then hits a low blow on Ospreay. Ospreay then hits a hidden blade on Fletcher. Davis then attacks Ospreay. Ospreay then hits an Os cutter off the cage on Fletcher for a near fall. Fletcher then hits Ospreay with a screwdriver. Absolutely brutal. Fletcher then hits a brainbuster off a chair for a near fall. Ospreay then hits a Styles Clash on the tacks that were laid on the middle of the mat for a near fall. Ospreay then hits a Spanish Fly off the top of the cage. The crowd erupts. After that, Fletcher then is looking on an Ospreay. Fletcher then screams at Ospreay that he hates him. After that, Ospreay hits a hidden blade, followed by a Tiger Driver on Kyle Fletcher, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Will Ospreay. Hats off to Will Ospreay for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go to our next match of the night. It's the main event of AEW's Revolution. It is Jon Moxley defending the AEW title against Cope. I thought this was a good match, man. It was a back-and-forth matchup between Moxley and Copeland, with Moxley and Cope both exchanging in the middle of the ring. Moxley was trying to keep the pace of the match, but Cope then hits an impaler on Moxley in the middle of the ring. Moxley then exposes the concrete floor, but Moxley hits a foot stomp on the exposed floor, on Copeland on the exposed floor. Moxley then hits a pile driver for a near fall. The ref then gets taken out. Moxley hits a paradigm shift on Cope. Wheeler Yuta is here. Yuta attacks Cope. Jay White is here as well. Jay then goes to hit Mox with the briefcase, but ended up hitting Copeland instead. Cope then gets up, hits a spear for a near fall, followed by 2 more spears. Christian is here. He pulls the referee out of the ring. He attacks the ref. Christian then signs a contract, pretty much cashing in his opportunity for an AEW world title. Christian then quickly gets in the ring, hits a spear for a near fall, followed by a kill switch for a near fall. But Moxley applies a bulldog choke on, I believe it was Christian or Adam Copeland. I think it was Christian. And the referee sounds for the bell, and your winner of the match and still AEW World Champion is Jon Moxley. After the match, Nana approaches Moxley when Moxley was heading to the back, and all of a sudden you look up and you see Swerve pretty much sitting or standing on top of a railing, and he jumps off the railing, taking out Jon Moxley, pretty much sending a message to Jon Moxley that, hey, I'm the next guy to possibly take that belt off of you and become the new AEW or 2-time AEW World Champion. A couple things I want to talk about, man, when it pertains to AEW's Revolution, and there's a lot to talk about, man. Was it the best pay-per-view I've seen from AEW? No, it was not. There was a lot of good that came out of Revolution, but there was also some things that came out that were bad. So let's start with the good. Number one, starting off with Adam Page and MJF, I thought it was a good match. I thought it was something that would actually get the fans invested. I think it was one of those storylines, and I mentioned this multiple times in the past, that I think it was something on the line of that this is something that a grudge match like this could save AEW. And I still truly believe that. I think it's something where you have 2 guys that have been with AEW literally since its existence, since day one. And it's a feud that can carry this company into the future. Now, is Tony Khan going to keep moving this storyline here between MJF and Adam Page? Who knows? I know the next pay-per-view that AEW has, I believe, is Dynasty coming up here in sometime in early April. Maybe they can start slowly building towards another matchup or a rematch here between MJF and Adam Page. I wouldn't be against that. I thought it was a good match. I was surprised with the outcome. I thought, for sure MJF was going to get the win over Adam Page. That did not happen. Adam Page was successful in beating MJF. So who knows what's going to be next with these 2 guys. I think it should be a rematch. Hopefully Tony Khan does do a rematch here between MJF and Adam Page. Because honestly, I feel like it's a story that they can, build and progress into another pay-per-view. And we get a second match here between both MJF and Adam Page. And I think, honestly, for what it's worth, I think it can only get better at this point if they actually build a compelling storyline for both MJF and Adam Page. Matches of the night for me. Number one, the match of the night for me that sticked out the most was absolutely 100% Toni Storm versus Mariah May. I think that matchup, honestly put the women's division on notice in a lot of ways. Number two, this was something where you had to look at the narrative of what these 2 women have done over the past, few months to a year. You know what I mean? Compared to what Mariah May and Toni Storm have done, from what Toni Storm did by bringing in Mariah May, May aligning herself up with Toni Storm, building that storyline, and then we get 3 incredible matches between both Toni Storm and Mariah May, and they kept getting better and better over time. And that's a credit to both Toni Storm and Mariah May. Toni Storm, and again, hats off to Toni Storm for getting the win in that matchup at Revolution last night, but Toni Storm did a phenomenal job by putting someone over like Mariah May. A lot of people, including myself, didn't really know a lot about Mariah May. We know that she wrestled over in Japan. She wrestled for Stardom. She was a name over there in Stardom. But a lot of the fans over in the States really didn't have an idea of who Mariah May was. And Toni Storm really built this foundation for Mariah May to kind of showcase her talent, showcase her skills. And then we get that ultimate betrayal from Mariah May on Toni Storm, and that builds that incredible story for these 2 women that, expanded from 3 different matches. And those matches, like I said, have gotten better and better over time, where we got the final product being what we had at Revolution with the Hollywood ending matchup. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And again, hats off to both Mariah May and Toni Storm. But, the issue, not an issue, but the thing that I, worry about is, okay, what's going to happen next for Toni Storm and Mariah May? I said this, I believe it was last week or a week ago, that when it pertains to Mariah May, I think this would be the perfect timing for her to take some time off. And I think she's earned it. I think this is something where she can take a month off, maybe 2 months, and really collect herself, and hopefully they build another compelling storyline for Mariah May that does not consist of Toni Storm. And May might have to go in the back of the line again and build herself up going towards, maybe another AEW Women's Championship matchup or possibly TBS title. I'm not against that either. For Toni Storm, I think after the matchup that she had with Mariah May last night, I think the next number one contender for Toni Storm's AEW Women's title should be none other than Jamie Hayter. Obviously Hayter was a former AEW Women's Champion. She had to relinquish that belt due to injury. That is the match to make, whether it is at Dynasty or whether it's leading up to All In. But that match needs to happen between Toni Storm and Jamie Hayter. I know Jamie Hayter's been away from AEW right now, dealing with visa issues. And hopefully she comes back. And hopefully when she does come back into the fold of AEW, we get a different Jamie Hayter. The Jamie Hayter that we have gotten before she had left due to visa issues, I wasn't a big fan of that Jamie Hayter. That she came in with the Scooby-Doo look. It just really didn't fit Jamie Hayter. I want Jamie Hayter to come back to what she once was and just this powerhouse. And the fans really gravitated towards Jamie Hayter, and she had one goal in mind, and that was to become the AEW Women's Champion. I want that same Jamie Hayter, that hunger and that fire in her to come back and just do whatever she can to get to Toni Storm's AEW Women's Championship, because that's the match that needs to be made. And hopefully we get that. Hopefully Jamie Hayter can figure out her visa issues, hopefully relatively soon, and we can see a storyline, hopefully, that's compelling enough to get the fans invested in another Toni Storm matchup, possibly against Jamie Hayter, because I can tell you right now, as far as the women are concerned, this was the best storyline that you can have right now between Toni Storm and Mariah May. They did a fantastic job with the build-up and the lead-up towards this final matchup here with this Hollywood ending match between Storm and Mariah May. I think it was great. I think the sit-down, interviews that they had with Renee, what Mariah May did on Collision when they came back from Australia, I think it was just, building and building and building until we finally get the Hollywood ending matchup. And to me, honestly, it definitely qualified for Match of the Night last night at Revolution. I think it was a great match. It told a hell of a story. I know some people were actually disappointed with the amount of blood that was shown during the matchup, but honestly, for what it's worth, man, I think that match kind of needed that. It needed that graphic of, how far both these women have come. And they were both willing to lay it on the line last night, whether it was Mariah May or Toni Storm, to walk out AEW Women's Champion. And that's exactly what we got last night. And sometimes in different situations, in different scenarios, in different matches, sometimes, the blood concept is needed. I think seeing that visual and what you're seeing in that match and how it's played out, sometimes you need it because it intensifies the story, whether it's for the women or for the men. And in certain matches, I think it grants that. You could look at a situation with, CM Punk and Drew McIntyre in Hell in a Cell. That match, needed that graphic because both these guys had a great story leading up to that matchup, and both guys were willing to lay their life on the line in that matchup to give the fans a hell of a story and give the fans a final product in this matchup, because both these guys had a lot of hostility towards each other leading up to that Hell in a Cell match. Well, when you look at the situation with Mariah May and Toni Storm, it's exactly the same thing. Toni Storm's biggest rival to date in AEW, hands down, has been Mariah May. And eventually that storyline had to come to an end, and what better way to do that in a Hollywood ending matchup, no disqualification, falls count anywhere matchup where both these women pretty much beat the hell out of one another last night, and they laid it on the line, made the best woman win, and that's exactly what happened last night. And I was happy with the outcome, but my biggest concern with that outcome is what's going to be next for Toni Storm. And to me, the best way that I could think of would be Jamie Hayter. Once Hayter figures out her visa issues and she comes back into the fold with AEW, that is the match to make for Toni Storm. Now you look at someone like Mariah May, where right now it's kind of up in the air for Mariah May. I think Mariah May needs to take some time off and have a little R&R, and then take 1 to 2 months off, come back, maybe go after the AEW Women's Championship again if it's not Toni Storm, or go after the TBS Women's title. It's another title that Mariah May has not held yet, and I would not mind seeing a Mariah May match versus Mercedes Moné, which I will get into in a minute, and my take of Mercedes Moné last night here in a little bit. But this is something where, Mariah May and what she's done up to this point has definitely granted herself time to take off. And I think that's the best thing for her to do. Take some time off, regroup, take some R&R, come back into the fold, and we'll see what you can do when you come back after a couple months from taking some time off. And like I said before, but Toni Storm, the next best challenger for her for the AEW Women's title is none other than Jamie Hayter. hands down. Speaking of Mercedes Moné, I had a lot of issues with the Moné match. I really did. And it's probably a hot take for a lot of people, man. The thing of it is, with Mercedes coming into AEW, I was excited. Obviously a lot of people besides myself were happy that Moné was coming in. A lot of people had this, fixation that she was going to come into the fold of AEW and change the women's division for AEW. That has not been the case at all. Mercedes Moné, at this point, has she gotten better over time? Yeah, she has. I think her in-ring ability has not changed. I think it's gotten better. And the Mercedes Moné we're seeing now I would put that the same, with the Sasha Banks that we saw before she left WWE. She's right there as far as what she can do in the ring. I'm not going to discredit what Mercedes Moné can do in that squared circle. She's a phenomenal talent. But the issue that I have with Moné currently right now in the state of AEW is the fact that she does not, and I repeat, does not want to put over other talent right now in AEW. She just doesn't. And there's a lot of things that I can say and give you guys example. For a prime example, when I mentioned earlier when it pertained to Toni Storm, and I said, who was Toni Storm's biggest rival in AEW so far? The number one name that's going to pop up in your head right off the rip is going to be Mariah May. And rightfully so, because both those women have had phenomenal matches and their epic story that they were playing out on television. You look at Mercedes Moné, who is Moné's biggest rival in AEW right now. You can't name a single person in the AEW locker room right now that is Moné's biggest rival, because there's not one. Moné doesn't want to put over younger talent at all. And I think that ultimately becomes an issue when it pertains to Moné. I think Moné needs to find somebody that she's willing to work with, but also being on the fact that she needs to be willing to drop the title. She needs to find someone that she's comfortable with actually improving younger talent. And if Moné is not willing to do that, then this is going to be an issue. Do I see Moné dropping the TBS title anytime soon? No. A lot of people have mentioned the fact that, Jade Cargill had the longest TBS title reign. Where do we see Jade Cargill now? She's over in WWE doing great things. She's in a really good storyline right now with Naomi, and she's doing her own thing over in WWE. Tony Khan doesn't want that. Tony Khan wants to break that Jade Cargill record, which I believe was like a 508 days or something like that. Tony Khan wants to break that record because he does not want Jade to hold that TBS title record because she's no longer employed with the company. I don't see Moné losing that TBS title. I know we saw Billy Starks last night watching on during the matchup between Moné and Watanabe and taking notes and everything else like this. And a lot of people, and myself included, last week said that, I want to see a matchup between Athena and Mercedes Moné, but I do not see Athena beating Mercedes Moné at All In. I just don't. And unfortunately, is it going to be something that's going to hurt Athena? No, it's not. And the reason why it's not is because, unfortunately, we have not seen Athena on Dynamite and Collision for quite a while. She is strictly had been on Ring of Honor for a long time now. So it's not going to hurt Athena if she ends up taking the L at All In against Moné. Now, if Moné loses to Athena, there's multiple different scenarios in that. I think if Moné beats Athena, she becomes, obviously, and if they put two belts on the line, she can be, the Ring of Honor Women's Champion. She's probably never going to show up on Ring of Honor television because Ring of Honor, as far as a promotion, has just gone to shit. And she has that belt for Ring of Honor and does nothing for Ring of Honor, does nothing for Athena. And they're just going to continue to push this narrative for Mercedes to be this undefeated, superstar in AEW and not put over other talent. And that's the problem with Moné. I don't know if Moné has 100% creative control over her character in AEW. But in fact, if she does in fact have that, it's bad. We don't need this. And she's not putting over younger talent, man. And that's ultimately the issue that AEW has as a whole right now, that they don't push the younger talent for the future of this company. We don't have that at all, whether it's the men nor the women. I mentioned this now for the past couple of weeks, that Tony Khan really has a hard time pushing the younger talent to make them into future stars for this company, so this company could possibly last for another, 5, 10, 15 years. That's not the case, man. And if you really truly look at the narrative of AEW currently right now, and I might have mentioned this last week, when it pertains to the AEW World Champion, to the AEW Tag Team Champion, to the TBS Champion, to the AEW Women's Champion, a lot of those people that hold those titles right now are former WWE talent. There's really not a lot of people in AEW that were AEW originals that are holding AEW gold right now. And the people that are really is TNT with Danny Garcia. Then you have, I wouldn't even technically say the Continental title because Okada he was over in New Japan. They brought him over and signed him to AEW, so he's not an original. And then you look at the Trios Championships, where I believe are currently being held by the Death Riders, if I'm not mistaken. You can't really truly say that all those guys are AEW originals when you look at someone like Pac and Claudio, who are former WWE talent. So, again, there's not really a lot of AEW homegrown talent that are currently holding AEW Championship gold right now. Takeshita, you can look at when he had the international title, but the problem is they brought Takeshita in. Takeshita wasn't a day one guy. As far as I'm concerned, he wasn't. I think they brought Takeshita over from DDT. So obviously he wasn't an original guy, and I know he wasn't there year one or I believe year two in AEW. So he's not an original guy. So you look at people like MJF and the Young Bucks and Adam Page, especially Page, where Page, is not even right now in the championship picture. And I'm happy with the outcome of Swerve, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But Swerve is also not an original guy. Swerve's a former WWE talent. He made a big name for himself, I would assume, over in NXT when he was in NXT, because his main roster run just wasn't it. But at the end of the day, AEW doesn't push their own talent. So when you look at someone like Mercedes Moné, you have to ask the question, like, who is going to be the person that's going to dethrone Mercedes Moné? Is it going to be Athena? Because, credit all in, Athena versus Mercedes Moné, I mean, take my money. I mean, I think it's going to be a great match. I think, it's in Athena's hometown. And, I mean, if you had a Rocky Balboa story, it'd be great to see Athena dethrone Mercedes Moné and become TBS Women's Championship, champion. But do I see it? No, I don't. And hopefully I'm wrong, but the way that things are starting to play out with Moné's not one to put over any other talent, and I'm sorry, but the matchup that she had with Watanabe just was absolutely fucking lackluster. I can't, I mean, with all due respect to Watanabe, and I don't know a lot about Momo Watanabe. I know she had wrestled, obviously, over in Stardom and wrestled in Japan, and I don't know a lot about Watanabe. I'm just going to keep it a stack with you guys. But what I will say from what I saw last night, there's not a lot of movesets in her arsenal, to be honest with you, man. A couple German suplexes, some brutal kicks. I know she had landed a kick on Moné that was a little low and ended up kicking Moné square in the face. Could have possibly broke her nose almost. But there really wasn't a whole lot of moveset that really got me intrigued with Watanabe to say, you know what, this woman is a number one contender for sure for Mercedes Moné's TBS title. And I didn't get that at all. I think Watanabe, I don't know why they went with Watanabe, but my thing is, if I'm not mistaken, she won a Battle Royal, and she could have picked any championship that she wanted to, so I don't understand why she chose Moné's TBS title rather than going after Toni Storm's AEW women's title, even though Toni Storm was in a storyline there with Mariah May. I'm just saying, it was kind of weird how, she picked Mercedes Moné off the rip. But again, I mean, it does beg the question, what's going to be next for Moné? And I think maybe, hopefully, Athena. But I still don't think that Moné is going to drop the TBS title to Athena. I just think that they're going to keep pushing this narrative with Mercedes. And I think Tony Khan has this fascination that he wants Moné to break the record that Jade Cargill had with holding that TBS title. So we're going to see, if that's the case, we're going to see Mercedes Moné with the TBS title for quite a while. Swerve. I mentioned Swerve earlier. I thought this, again, was another great match. I thought Swerve and Ricochet, this was probably Ricochet's best match in AEW by far. Hands down. And the crazy thing is, if you look at this matchup that happened last night at Revolution between Swerve and Ricochet, obviously, there were stipulations on the line. The winner of this matchup would be the new number one contender for the AEW World title, which, again, means a lot, probably to both Ricochet and Swerve, absolutely. But when you look at the brass tacks of this matchup and the storyline around it, this match was literally wrapped around a robe that was currently being held and worn by none other than Prince Nana. And Nana had lost that robe to Ricochet, and Ricochet took that robe as his own. So this matchup was based upon two factors. One, a number one contender matchup for the AEW World's title, and the fact that Swerve was trying to do everything that he can in his power to retrieve the robe that was stolen from Nana from Ricochet, and Swerve will give Nana his robe back once again. The match itself was great. And like I said, I think this was probably Ricochet's best match so far to date in AEW, hands down. And the one thing that I can appreciate, not just from Ricochet, but from Swerve, when you look at someone like Swerve, man, Swerve is a AEW guy. He is all business, no bullshit. He walks in that ring, the guy demands attention, and when he steps inside those ropes, man, the guy's going to give you one hell of a match. Absolutely. I was happy with the outcome of this match. I think Swerve most likely we would get that AEW World Championship matchup at Dynasty against John Moxley. I think Swerve and Moxley is going to be absolutely fantastic. But the match itself between Ricochet and Swerve, man, it was great. It told a hell of a story. Ricochet was, pretty much mocking Nana. He told Prince Nana that he made moderations to the robe, which he did by putting, his logo on the robe. And just kind of, pretty much sticking it to Prince Nana and how much, and he knew he was going to get under Prince Nana's skin due to the fact that how much that robe means to Prince Nana. That robe means everything to Prince Nana. And Swerve and Ricochet had a hell of a match, man. And Swerve ended up becoming victorious in that matchup. And the one moment that sticks out with me in that match was what happened after the match, where Swerve went out and grabbed the robe. He gets down, he kneels down in the ring, and he just, hands the robe over to Prince Nana as, a huge accomplishment that Swerve wanted to do. And he wanted to do everything in his power to retrieve that robe that Ricochet had stole from Nana, a couple weeks back. And it was a huge accomplishment for Swerve. And you see Swerve and Nana both, embrace in the middle of the ring. And then, Swerve obviously being exhausted from the match. Prince Nana walks up and pretty much puts the robe over Swerve, like Swerve is pretty much like James Brown or some shit. It was a great moment. The fans were 100% invested in this matchup. And it's crazy because, like I said, if you think about it, yes, this match was for a number one contendership for the AEW World title, but a lot of this match had to do with the robe that was previously worn by Prince Nana. And the fans gravitated towards it, man. And there was no blood involved in this matchup. It just told a hell of a story. And again, you don't need blood for every single match. Yeah, there's some matches that, they need it to tell the story. Sure. The matchup here between Swerve and Ricochet didn't need it. And it goes to show you why they didn't need it, because everything came down to the robe. And Swerve wanted to, retrieve that robe back and give it back to its rightful owner, being Prince Nana. And Nana was happy. He was doing his little dance in the middle of the ring. The fans erupted. And it was a great moment. And like I said, I was happy with the outcome, man. Swerve, I think he had a really good championship run when he was AEW World title. Now he's going after the title again to become second-time AEW World Champion. And the matchup with him and Moxley is going to be absolutely phenomenal, man. That match is going to be an absolute banger. And who knows? Maybe Swerve would be the guy to dethrone Jon Moxley, because, at this moment right now, if it's not Swerve, I have no idea who's going to be the person to dethrone Jon Moxley, because I don't know when or if we will see Darby Allin. Darby Allin's away right now from AEW. He's trying to climb Mount Everest, so he's going to be away from AEW for quite a while. So right now on paper, Swerve is that guy. I would have to put my money on Swerve to be the guy to dethrone Jon Moxley and end all this Death Rider bullshit, and for Swerve to become once again AEW World Champion. And I'm looking forward to that, and I'll talk about what happened towards the end of AEW with Swerve and Moxley towards the end of the podcast. But again, man, hats off to Swerve. It was a great moment there between Swerve and Prince Nana when Swerve was able to retrieve the robe from Ricochet and give it to Prince Nana, man. It was a great moment. Other matches on the card too, man. Will Ospreay and Kyle Fletcher, man. It was a great steel cage match. It was probably one of the best steel cage matches I've seen in quite a while. With that being said, though, with Will Ospreay, number one, Will Ospreay, if not, is probably one of the best wrestlers, if not the best wrestler on the planet today. Ospreay, I made jokes about Ospreay not too long ago, man, and I stand behind it. That guy can have a matchup with a loaf of bread in the middle of the ring, and it'd be a 4-star classic match or a 5-star classic. I mean, the guy can wrestle, man. The guy is an incredible talent, and he just puts on banger matches. And this was one of those banger matches. Him and Kyle Fletcher, man, have put on some bangers. And throughout this match, yeah, there was some people that were pissed off with the amount of blood that was a part of this matchup from Fletcher and Will Ospreay. And yeah, it was a lot considering the fact that we just saw Toni Storm in the matchup that she had with Mariah May. And there was a lot of blood in that matchup, and we get the same thing with Will Ospreay. And maybe the blood in this matchup between Ospreay and Fletcher wasn't needed. Did I hate it? No. I didn't hate it. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, yeah, it was the worst thing. No, I'm not going to say that. But what I will say is this. I believe this is about the third match now that Ospreay has had with Fletcher since all this shit has gone down with the Don Callis family and Will Ospreay. This will be the time that, the Fletcher and Ospreay thing needs to come to an end. I don't know what's next for Fletcher. I think if this whole thing is done between Ospreay and Fletcher, I think Fletcher would be suitable to go after the TNT title. I think that would be great for him. I wouldn't mind seeing a matchup between Fletcher and Danny Garcia. I think for Ospreay, I would say the same thing. Maybe the TNT title, or possibly put him in the conversation for an AEW World title, or put him on the main card chasing after the AEW World title, because I think it's time for Ospreay to go after the AEW World title. I don't really know. I'm not going to sit here and say there's not a lot left for Ospreay. I'm not going to say that. But I think as far as progression of where he's going in AEW, I think he needs to be in the conversation that he's going to be chasing after the AEW World title at this point. Hopefully the Fletcher and Ospreay shit's done. I just don't think we need it anymore. I think those guys have done enough up to this point to, keep the fans satisfied with their storyline. And I think the Don Callis family needs to hit a hard reset, especially due to the fact that, which I'll talk about here soon, Takeshita ended up dropping the belt to Omega, and Fletcher ended up losing to Will Ospreay. They need a hard reset, and, maybe they'll do something else that's more intriguing for the Don Callis family. But I wasn't against this matchup between Fletcher and Ospreay. I think the steel cage match was great. My only thought process from this matchup is hopefully that Fletcher and Ospreay are done, and both those guys can go their own way respectfully and do their own thing. Because at this point, I don't think we need to see any more Ospreay and Fletcher. Both these guys need to move on. Speaking of the Don Callis family, Takeshita. I mentioned this a couple minutes ago, or a couple seconds ago. Takeshita defending the international title against Kenny Omega. Kenny Omega, this was Omega's first pay-per-view match, I believe, since he's been back with dealing with diverticulitis. He was off the scene for AEW for quite a while. I thought it was a really good match. I thought it was a great showing by both Omega and Takeshita. Takeshita, man, is severely underrated. And I mentioned that multiple times. If not now, I will mention it then. He is severely underrated. I kind of wish that he got away from Don Callis a little bit. I have a lot of praise for Takeshita. Takeshita, I'm not going to say that he is the Great Muta. I'm a big fan of Great Muta. He's one of my all-time favorites. But I put Takeshita in the conversation possibly that he reminds me a lot of Masahiro Chono. And what he did in his career. If you guys don't know who Masahiro Chono is, go back and watch him in New Japan. He was also actually a part of the NWO back in the WCW days. So he was a powerhouse, man. And I believe he also won the G1 Climax, I think a couple times, if I'm not mistaken. I know he at least won it once. And it's a big tournament over in Japan for professional wrestling. But Takeshita gives me a lot of Masahiro Chono vibes. And I think he's severely underrated. Is he being utilized correctly? Yeah, I do. But, man, you want to talk about someone that has a great Blue Thunder bomb. And there's only two guys that I know of right now on paper that land that maneuver so well, and that would be Takeshita and Sami Zayn. That Blue Thunder bomb that Takeshita landed on Omega last night was just absolutely perfect. And it's just a brutal move, man. And Omega really held his own. I mean, Takeshita is not somebody that's going to be a pushover in any kind of match, no matter what. And I remember the matchup that Takeshita, I believe, had with Ospreay, and it was one hell of a match. And, Takeshita's going to give you a match. He's going to let you know that you're in the ring, with one of the guys that knows what the hell they're doing. And Takeshita knows what the hell he's doing. And for a while there, he was beating the hell out of Omega. I thought Omega was really, maybe it was too soon for Omega, but Omega ended up, becoming victorious with that roll-up and becoming the new international champion. But it was a hell of a match. Speaking of Omega, though, with him winning the international title, this is how I see this is going to play out. There's been a lot of speculation and rumors that AEW has, had talks or conversations, perhaps, about possibly forming two titles into one. And those two titles that have been talked about is taking the Continental title and combining it with the International title. And ironically enough, the two guys that hold those titles, one being Okada with the Continental title, and now currently Kenny Omega with the International title, this matchup will happen. There will be another matchup here between Omega and Okada, and that match is going to take place at All In Texas, in July. That match is going to happen in All In. Omega, Okada, champion versus champion, both belts on the line, winner take all. That match will take place this year at All In. I'm calling it now in July. And the winner of that matchup will have both belts, and they will merge those belts into one specific title. The writing's already on the books right now, man. This is exactly how they're going to play this out. And then we're going to possibly see Omega finally start to have some kind of rebuttal here towards Okada, which should have happened when Omega finally came back from dealing with diverticulitis, because the Elite beat the shit out of Kenny Omega. Then we see Omega come back after the Continental Classic tournament just to walk into the ring and hand Okada back his Continental title, and didn't say anything in regards of what they did to him before he left dealing with diverticulitis. There was no rebuttal from Omega whatsoever at all for what they did to him before he left dealing with diverticulitis. So now the narrative is the fact that Okada currently holds the Continental title. Omega currently holds the International title. There's been talks and conversations about possibly merging both these titles into one. And what better way to do that than have a champion versus champion matchup with Okada versus Omega taking place in July at All In. Because I'm telling y'all right now, Tony Khan desperately wants to book that matchup between Okada and Omega, and he wants to book it in AEW, and most likely taking place at All In. All In is AEW's biggest show of the year. And a lot of people, there's some people out there that are patiently waiting to see another matchup between Omega and Okada. Am I one of those people? No, because I've seen the matches a couple times now between Omega and Okada. Do I think it's going to be a good match? Yeah. Do I think they need to merge those belts into one? Absolutely. Because, no offense, the Continental Championship means absolutely jack shit. I'm sorry. That belt is one of the most useless damn titles in AEW history. It means nothing. And no offense to Okada. Okada's hardly doing anything with that goddamn belt. Yeah, he had a matchup with Buddy Matthews. Yes, he had a matchup with Brody King. How many times, though, have we seen Okada, since he's won that title, actually defend that Continental Championship? I can count those times on one hand. Literally. It's not a lot. And to be honest with you, the title just means absolutely nothing. I don't even know why we even have the Continental Championship. It means absolutely nothing. So my pick here is that we're going to see Okada Omega at All In, winner take all, champion versus champion, where the Continental Championship and the International Championship will be on the line in one night at All In, winner take all. I think that's what's going to happen. Moving on from that, though, we also get the other match that really stuck out for me was obviously the main event. Jon Moxley defending the AEW World title against Cope. This match, to me, man, was one of those matches where, honestly, legitimately, it pissed me off. Did I think Copeland was going to beat Moxley? No. If I had to be 100% honest with y'all, which I am, I did not see Cope walking into Revolution and walking out AEW World Champion. I just did not see it. I wanted it to happen, sure. But did I see it happening? No. There was so much goddamn confusion in this matchup. You see Wheeler Yuta come out. You see Jay White come out. Jay White goes to help Cope with the briefcase, but ends up hitting Copeland anyway by mistake. Jon Moxley pretty much capitalized on this. Referee goes for a pin. Then he's pulled out by Christian Cage, which I mentioned that this possibly was going to happen when I did my Dynamite review. And I told you guys that Christian Cage could be involved in the main event, which he was. So Cage then pulls the referee out of the ring. He ends up signing his contract that would grant him an AEW World title opportunity. He signs the contract. He gets involved in this matchup, hits, I think a spear, 2 spears on Edge, or Cope, doesn't get the pin, and then I think he ends up getting choked out by Jon Moxley. So Moxley retains the belt. Christian Cage now loses his opportunity at the AEW World title because he cashed it in and lost. So that's over. So now you had to look at the narrative now. Okay, let's look what happened. Number one, the shit was chaotic as hell. It really was. Number two, what's going to happen now at the end of this matchup? Well, I can tell you. Jay White, in some kind of capacity, is going to be involved in this situation here with Cope because of what happened with the briefcase. Them two are possibly going to have a match. Then you also look at the other side of that coin, and you look at Christian Cage, because Cage did come down to the ring, ended up hitting Copeland with the contract. It was in like a metal container thing or something like that, and ended up, hitting Copeland in the head with it, so he can, so Christian can cash in. So could we possibly see another Christian Cage Copeland matchup here because of what Christian did to Copeland in that main event spot at Revolution last night? Could happen. But now it's okay. Well, now we know the direction that Swerve's going, because Swerve beat Ricochet for the new number one contendership, so it will be Swerve and Moxley most likely taking place at Dynasty. But where does this leave Copeland? And honestly, where does this leave the Death Riders, to be honest with you? Because at this point, there was no Pac there. There was no Marina Shafir. There was no Claudio. Moxley walked down to the ring by himself. So what's going to be next for the Death Riders? I think, personally, a lot of this is going to come down to Swerve and Moxley. Because I had mentioned something in the past, I don't know if it was last week or the week prior to that even though Swerve has still aligned himself up with Prince Nana, what if we get a scenario here where Swerve needs to reach out? That the Death Riders come back into play. They're all healthy now. They're done with Copeland and all that other shit. And now Swerve, they know Swerve's the new number one contender, but Swerve's all by himself. There's nobody helping out Swerve. At least Copeland had FTR, and he had Jay White. Swerve's in an island all by himself, only just him and Prince Nana. What if, and it's just a possibility here, but what happens if Swerve goes to Prince Nana and say, we can't do this alone? Jon Moxley has too many people helping him out right now. He has a stable. He has a team. I can't do this alone. And then Swerve talks to Nana. And then Nana and Swerve ask MVP to help them out this one time. And they'll owe him a favor. Maybe we'll get a Swerve Lashley championship matchup possibly if Swerve beats Jon Moxley. And the Hurt Syndicate end up helping Swerve and Prince Nana this one time to help Swerve take down Jon Moxley and the Death Riders successfully. And Swerve becomes a new AEW World Champion, and the Death Riders and Jon Moxley are no more. It's definitely a scenario that can happen. I don't know if it will or not, but what I do know is that Swerve is now the new number one contender to Jon Moxley AEW World Championship, and we know that Jon Moxley has teamed up with Claudio Castagnoli, Wheeler Yuta, Pac, and Marina Shafir. What if Swerve, with just those numbers alone, he's outnumbered. So what if Swerve aligns himself up with none other than the Hurt Syndicate to try to take down and pretty much dethrone Jon Moxley and the Death Riders, and they just decimate him and get rid of this whole Death Rider thing? I'm all for that. If that would be the situation at hand, I'm all for it. Because the Death Rider situation, that theme song, and all that shit is literally the death of AEW. I hate that goddamn song. It sounds like the song that they would play at the death of AEW. I can't stand it. The Jon Moxley experience is coming to an end. It has come to an end. People are tired of this Jon Moxley Death Rider shit. It is. And to be honest with you, it's not helping Jon Moxley's case at all right now. They're not. The only thing that would save him is if Jon Moxley ends up getting kicked out from the Death Riders, or he just beats the hell out of the entire Death Riders and does his own thing. Because right now, people are just sick and tired of seeing Jon Moxley with this Death Rider shit. We're done. We had enough, man. The well has run dry. We're done. You know what I mean? And a lot of people were hoping that Copeland would be the guy to beat Jon Moxley and walk out AEW World Champion. Well, unfortunately, he was unsuccessful in that due to interference from Wheeler Yuta and Christian Cage, as well as Jay White, because Jay White was there to help Cope, grabs the briefcase, goes to hit Jon Moxley, but instead misses Jon Moxley and then hits Adam Copeland right across the head with the damn briefcase, which pretty much ultimately lost him the matchup and the opportunity to become the new AEW World Champion. So Jay White, somehow, in some way, there's going to be some kind of scenario here that plays out between Jay White, Cope, and Christian Cage in some kind of capacity. I don't know how, but it will. And I'm looking forward to it. Like I said before, man, do I think Revolution was one of the best pay-per-views AEW's put together? No. Was it the worst? Absolutely not. But again, I think that, number one match for me, in my honest opinion, the match that stole the night for me was 100% Toni Storm versus Mariah May. I thought it was a great match. It was a great way to end that storyline between both these women. And again, hats off to Toni Storm and Mariah May. And, I'm happy it's coming to an end. And it just told one hell of a story. And hats off to Toni Storm, because I think Toni, like I mentioned earlier, really did put Mariah May over with the story that they had in AEW. And, my hats goes off to Toni Storm for that. And Toni Storm's a hell of a wrestler. And, sky's the limit for Toni Storm. Ricochet Swerve, again, it was a great matchup, told a great story. And now we have a new number one contender for the AEW World title being Swerve. And then, obviously, Kyle Fletcher and Will Ospreay was my top three matches of the night for Revolution, where Ospreay was successful in beating Kyle Fletcher in a steel cage matchup. But like I said, for Ospreay, he has to be in the conversation for an AEW World title opportunity or something. And he needs to get the hell away from Don Callis and the Don Callis family. He needs to move on. If I had to, give the rating from a 1 out of 10, 1 being, the show sucked, a 10 being the show was the greatest, I would probably give it a comfortable, 6.5, 7. I think it was a decent show. It was a good show. Not one of the AEW's best pay-per-views. But damn sure was not the worst. I look forward to this week's Dynamite. Hopefully, we get some more intrigue or more story going on and figure out really what the hell is going on here with Copeland and Jay White and Christian Cage. I'm sure we're going to hear something from Swerve now that he's the new number one contender. What's next for Ricochet? I'm looking forward to all that, man, and hopefully we get some more insight on that on this week's Dynamite. But, again, man, Revolution didn't disappoint. I think it was a really good show. I think with the things they were trying to do and the build-up and the lead up to this Revolution, do I think they were successful? Yeah, I do. I think the Toni Storm and Mariah May match was successful. I think Will Ospreay Fletcher was successful, as well as Swerve and Ricochet. And I mentioned this earlier, man. When you look at Swerve and Ricochet, the main story of the matchup was about, pretty much a damn robe that Prince Nana owned. And he wanted to do everything in his power to get that damn robe back. And Swerve ended up winning the matchup and being successful, and ended up giving Prince Nana his robe back, and the crowd erupted. It was a great moment between Nana and Swerve. So it told a hell of a story, man. And I think Revolution was a good show. Wasn't the best, but wasn't the worst. But it was a good show. From a scale from 1 to 10, I had to probably give it a 6.5, 7 at best for last night's Revolution. But like I said, man, I'm looking forward to Dynamite this week and see what's going to be next. What's next for Ricochet? What's next for Tony Storm? The rebuttal from Swerve and Jon Moxley, and what Swerve has to say to Jon Moxley, and what Copeland has to say after what happened to him at the end of the Jon Moxley match in the main event of Revolution. So I look forward to what's going to happen next with Cope as well, man. It's definitely going to be some intriguing stuff. Hopefully leading up to this week's Dynamite, so I'm definitely looking forward to it. But with that being said, this is my review of AEW's Revolution. I hope you guys are out there staying safe.